Hello everyone, I'm Janvi and today continuing our series of understanding post-colonial literature. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about diasporic literature. Now, what exactly does the word diaspora mean? So, the word diaspora derives from the Greek word which means to disperse. Now, this diaspora can be the voluntary or forced movement of people from their homeland into new regions. Having arrived in a new geographical and cultural context, they negotiate two cultures, their own and the new one. Now, diasporic literature captures the difference between the homeland and the exiled. It examines the relationship between the center, which is the origin place of the ancestors, and the periphery, which is where the next generation of those ancestors end up moving. Now, it's extremely important to understand diasporic literature and the need of diasporic literature in today's day and age. In order to simplify, in order to simply understand who exactly are these diasporic individuals. Diasporic individuals are people who have left their nation because of some reason or the other. Maybe they are forced out of their nation, or maybe this is a voluntary exile that they have undertaken. These individuals, when they are outside of their nation, when they write something that is about their nation, about the nation that they have left, maybe it's their opinions, maybe it's their ideologies, maybe it's just a dream that they have of going back to that nation once again and living there. That simply is what diasporic literature is. Now, I don't know how many of you are chronically online like me, but if you are, in the recent few days, you must have seen the New York elections and what's going on and how Zohran Mamdani has become a cultural icon of sorts. Now, why is it that the Desi NRIs are freaking out so much over his win? That's because he's the son of the very famous Indian American director Meera Nair. Yes, the person who directed The Namesake, a film which was based on Jhumpa Lahiri's book by the same name, The Namesake. And a lot of people believe that it comes under one of the very few instances where the film is actually as good as the book itself. He is the son of Meera Nair and his father is a post-colonial professor. So when a person like that, when a person who holds a hybrid identity, because his mother is Indian, his father used to live in Africa and he lives in America. So in a way, he holds multiple identities, the identity of his culture, the identity of his religion, the identity of his ancestors, and the identity of himself. This person becomes the perfect representative of a diasporic individual, which is why a lot of people back home, a lot of people who would never have heard of Mamdani are actually celebrating his win as a personal win because he has become a cultural diasporic icon. Let's go back a bit and try to understand where the idea of diaspora comes from, specifically in terms of India. So the colonial plan for a hybrid native is described in Thomas Macaulay's The Most Infamous Minutes of 1835, where he described the creation of Europeanized natives as the creation of a class of people Indian in blood and color, but English in taste and opinion. This entire class of people at one point of time were called the Babus. These were the people who looked like Indians, who were Indians, but who behaved as if they were people from the West. Now, this hybrid identity has continued to live with us ever since then. Ever since then, people from nations like ours are constantly trying to come across as somebody that they might not be, because they believe that in order to be accepted in the society, that's who they have to be. That in order to be accepted in the society, their Indian identity is not going to suffice. They have to become somebody else. They have to become a westernized version of themselves. Now, that diaspora basically means the displacement of a community or culture into another geographical and cultural region. A lot of you must have NRI cousins or friends who have lived outside of the nation and come back. These people move out of the nation, maybe because of their family, maybe because they want to pursue education outside. But what eventually happens is that when they grow up here and then they move outside of the nation, with them they are taking their culture, with them they are taking their upbringing, and when they end up living over there for a lot of years, what happens is that the cultural identities clash. The identity of their homeland and the identity of this new land where they have arrived, these identities clash and gives birth to a completely new identity, which is a hybrid. Now, from hybrid, you guys might be able to to recall the name of a person named Homi K. Bhabha, who gave the theory of hybridity. Apart from Homi K. Bhabha, there are multiple writers and theorists who continuously talk about dual identity and diasporic identity. Meena Alexander further terms diasporic writings as writings in search of a homeland, and Rushdie becomes a perfect example of this. You pick up any book by Salman Rushdie, most of his books have at least one or two instances taking place in India, specifically in Bombay, because he was born in Bombay. And I personally believe that all of his works, all of his stories are about going back to Bombay, about the utter helplessness that he feels because he's not able to come back to the place that he always will call his homeland. Further, Roger Bromley proposes that every narrative in diasporic writing is an individual story as well as a cultural story. When a person is writing, when a diasporic person is writing a story, they are just not writing about their homeland, they are just not writing about the characters who lived back in their homeland. They are also writing about an entire population. They are representing an entire population on a national and an international front. The prime example of this becomes Rohinton Mistry, who is a Mumbai-born writer currently residing in Canada. Now, if you read his book A Fine Balance, which according to me is one of the best books ever written, the entire plot of the book takes place in Bombay. Majority of it takes place in Bombay. It talks about caste, it talks about the caste system, class system, it talks about gender issues and the turmoils that the nation went through during the emergency that was imposed by Indira Gandhi. And at one juncture in the book, one of the characters of the book goes outside of the nation, and when he comes back, he's not able to recognize his nation. He's not able to understand what happened to the people who yesterday he used to call his brothers and sisters. He's not able to understand what happened to the landscape that used to be beautiful and pure in his eyes. So when we read books like this, we also understand the personal experiences of the people who move out of these nations. You must have seen that ever since the 1990s, there has been a mass appeal of Bollywood films, the Bollywood masala films specifically, even outside of the nation. That's because all of these NRIs, all of these people who have to move out of their nation because of some reason or the other, constantly crave any single connection to their nation. And in the recent years, you must have seen that a lot of people who live outside of India are also constantly trying to get back to their cultural roots, to get back to their identities. They are not shying away anymore. Earlier, they used to face a lot of racism, which is why they had to stop representing. You would see a lot of people who would change their names in order to sound more Western. They would change their accents, they would change their complete behavior in order to be accepted. If you read Kiran Desai's The Inheritance of Loss, you would understand their experiences. There is one character in The Inheritance of Loss who goes to America, who goes outside of the nation to earn some money for him and his father. And over there he constantly faces racism because of his identity. In that particular book, we see how Indians, Pakistanis and Bangladeshis are treated in America. How people constantly tell them that they smell of ginger or garlic or of masalas. There's this one specific episode in Black Mirror, season 6. The episode is around this Indian girl, and very subtly in the episode they show that how the co-worker behaves towards her whenever she is eating her lunch. The co-worker quietly shuns her down by telling her that your lunch smells, that you smell of spices, and we do not like it. Now, P.K. Nair in his book suggests that we have to see the diasporic author as a metonym, which means one who stands for the whole community. So when V.S. Naipaul is writing anything, his writings are considered to be the representation of the Indian people living in the Caribbean islands. Now, just to give a basic context, V.S. Naipaul is a person of an Indian origin, but he used to live on the Caribbean islands because years ago his family moved over there. Now, there is a large Indian population living in Caribbean islands. If you read Peggy Mohan's Jahajan, you would get to know about it. Jahajan is a story of a 100-year-old woman named Dida, who was one of the many indentured laborers who were manipulated by the colonial powers and told that they would find employment and education and money and safety and security if they just went on these ships and went to the Caribbean islands and helped the colonial powers. These poor people, because they did not have a lot of employment opportunities back here in India, they went there. And what ended up happening there is that they ended up working and slaving their lives away for the colonial powers in return of basically nothing, and they had to settle down over there, away from their family, away from their homeland. In the book Jahajin, Peggy Mohan also explores the relation of the language Bhojpuri in the Caribbean islands, because it is one of the most widespread languages used in the Caribbean islands, because a lot of indentured laborers who were taken from India to Caribbean islands used to speak Bhojpuri. Now coming back to V.S. Naipaul, V.S. Naipaul is a person who I do not believe has had a lot of relations when it comes to India. Yes, his family, his ancestors were Indians, but he has not had a lot of personal interactions with India, but still he's believed to be an Indian writer because he used to write about India in a lot of his books. If you ever read his travelogues on India, you would come across the subtle racism that he shows towards his own people. Remember in last lecture I told you about this specific sentence that Neil Bisudnath says, that we the post-colonial people are exploiting each other the way that the colonial people exploited us. That is kind of what V.S. Naipaul does in his travelogues. Derek Walcott says this beautiful thing about V.S. Naipaul, that you spit on your people and your people applaud. Other famous or important diasporic writers are Bharati Mukherjee, Buchi M. Chetta, Carol Phillips, Anif Qureshi, and Salman Rushdie, and Jhumpa Lahiri, Monica Ali, and Meena Alexander, Kiran Desai, Anita Desai. All of these people are writing at the end of the day about their diasporic identity. Now, much of diasporic writing explores the theme of an original home. The original home, as now lost due to their exile, is constantly worked into the imagination of myth of the displaced individual or community. This basically means that most of the people who are writing diasporic literature are constantly writing in a search of a homeland, in a search of a place where they can go back to. If you read Amitav Ghosh's The Shadow Lines, there's a specific scene in the book where one of the characters, as I told you in one of the earlier lectures, that where one of the characters is in a plane and she looks down and she asks that, where are these borders that people keep talking about? Where are those lines that have broken our nations? Where are these lines that tell us that, okay, we are part of this nation and they are part of that nation, and that all of us, that we are not supposed to ever come together because of these lines drawn by people? Where are these lines because of which I lost my homeland? Where are these lines because of which I lost my family, my friends, my loved ones? Where are these lines? Now, The Shadow Lines also becomes a beautiful book in the genre of partition literature, albeit it talks about the partition of Bangladesh and India, not the partition of Pakistan and India. Whenever we talk about partition literature, most of the times we think about the partition of India and Pakistan, which is important. Partition literature from the partition of India and Pakistan is extremely important. Writers like Saadat Hasan Manto and Ismat Chughtai, they provide us a peculiar look at the lived experiences during the time of partition. We will talk about partition literature in our next lecture. In this lecture, we are supposed to just understand what exactly comes under the term, the umbrella term diaspora literature. Now, using a range of terms that suggest borders, thresholds, and indeterminate spaces, Bhabha rejects the notions of a fixed, rooted, or binary identity. He also rejects the ideas of original identity. Instead, Bhabha proposes that we see identity as a process of negotiation and of articulation. According to Bhabha, an individual, a diasporic individual, keeps on becoming because of this hybrid identity that they end up occupying. Their nation, their culture keeps on changing. The culture that they have left behind keeps on changing. The culture that they now occupy or inhabit keeps on changing, and with that it becomes a continuous process of changing and exploring these hybrid identities. Today we are going to stop here. We are going to keep this lecture brief so that in the next lecture, when we talk about partition literature, we can explore much more. So yeah, that's it for today. Bye bye. Meet you in the next lecture.